Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Samach Dalet in Nidrim. Top of the page, a new parak Shi'i. Rabbi Lezer Omer, now we talk about being a posech netter. What does that mean? We're talking about where your mater netter, you made a netter and you regret it. So you come to a Talmud Chacham or a Bezdin and your mater netter. How are your mater netter? They found an opening for you. They say, had you known such and such, you should have foreseen that. Had you realized that, would you have made the netter? And you say, no, I wouldn't have made the netter had I realized that. And it's something, let's say, that's common, as we'll see. It's something that you could have foreseen it. You made a mistake, you regret it. So you're posech with a netter like that. However, what are the excuses that you can give? Rav Lezer says, they might tell like this, the rabbis might say, had you known that you'd be an embarrassment to your parents, the Ran brings down that they call you're a Russia for making a netter, a person who's makes a netter a lot, he's a person who's angry and gets upset all the time and starts making the Dorim. The Ran says at the top of the page on the left side, had you known that you're embarrassing your parents, you're shaming them, because you're making Dorim easily. They call your parents are also Rishon, because you must have seen what they did too. And where did you learn to be such a nadran, a person who makes an eder? Maybe your parents are also like that. Losh Acher says the Ran. In other words, even the one shot was that you're an embarrassment to your parents. Your parents are fine people, and look what you have become. Or just the opposite, you're embarrassing them because people say, "Well, where did you learn to make Nadarim like that?" You know, the kid talks the way he learns in his parents' house. So Blezer says that's a valid kind of an opening. In other words, they tell him, had you known that you'd be an embarrassment to your parents, had you realized that you've made that edit, he says, no, I wouldn't have made that edit in those circumstances, then that's a good posech, and the netter can be annulled. And we said many times that the netter that's annulled by the chachamim, by the rabbis, by the bezdin, by a rabbi, it's annulled entirely. So it's like the netter was never there. So Bled says you can make that. What's the concept over here the main idea here is that he has to be able to tell the truth. In other words, had you realized you'd be an embarrassment to your parents, would you have made the netter? And Rav Lezer says, yeah, that's a good posech, because if he says, yeah, had I realized it, I wouldn't have made it, he's probably telling the truth, then you could be posech netter. The Chacham disagree. The Chacham say no. You know why? Because, as we'll see in the Gemara, because the main reason is meaning because the person will say that only out of embarrassment. Had you known that you'd be an embarrassment to your parents that you'd made the netter? Now, if he's being truthful, he says, yes, had I realized that I wouldn't have made the netter, I don't want to embarrass my parents, that would be good. But we're afraid he's just saying that because he doesn't want to, out of respect for his parents, says, yeah, I wouldn't have made it. But he's lying. That's the concern. And if he's lying, it's not a good Pesach. So had you realized it, would you have made that? Oh, I wouldn't have made the netter. If he's telling the truth, yeah, I wouldn't have made the netter, then okay, that's a good Pesach. But here we're afraid that he's not telling the truth. So the Chacham say that's not a good Pesach. Again, Reb Lezer Omer Pasuk letter of Limo, the honor of your parents. When your parents, had you realize that you're an embarrassment to your parents and you're reflecting badly on them, had you made the netter? Let's just he's probably telling the truth. The Chacham Moshem, Amar of Tzedek says, according to Reb Lezer, that you can be Pesach that I supposed to cover Avimo. Why just bother with the honor of your parents? You have to b'chavod hamakom. Had you known that you'd be embarrassment to God, that God doesn't want you to make Nadarim, right? We learned that don't make Nadarim. It's better not to make Nadarim at all. Don't get angry. Don't make Nadarim. Had you known that you would have been embarrassment to God, b'chavod hamakom, would you have made that? So Rav Tzadok saying, according to Rav Lezer, you could even go that far too and say, you'd say, had you known you'd be embarrassment to God, would you have made the netter? And it's mashma that maybe according to Blezer, even that would also be good. Amrullah, the Girsa in the Ran is Amrullah. They answered him, no, in Kain and Darim, and there's no Darim at all. If that's an excuse everybody can give. A particular netter, you have to say, oh, you made this netter. Had you realized this and this detail that you should have foreseen it? Did you foreseen it? Yeah, I forgot about that. I neglected to look at that. It has to be something that's common, as we'll see. But I neglected to look at that. That's a very thing if he's telling the truth. But if it's something like, hey, you realize that making the Dharm, you're an embarrassment to God, you're dishonoring God, that's valid for every netter. Any netter you make is an embarrassment to God. So therefore, that wouldn't be a good opening, even maybe according to Rabbi Lezer. So that's what Rabbi Lezer says, yes, but not b'chavad amakom. Modem chacham l'Rabbi Lezer, and a chacham modem to Rabbi Lezer, the davar shebeino lebein av v'imo. Let's say he made a netter forbidding his parents to have enough of him. We're not talking about a stam netter, and now where you could use an excuse had you known that making the Dharm would be an embarrassment to your parents had you made the netter. Here, the netter was specifically about his parents. Like my parents can't have enough of me. He made such a netter like that. So in a case like that, we'll see in the Gemara, because once he has such disrespect for his parents that he made a netter that his parents can't have enough from them. So then you're not worried. Why do the Chum say that you can't use that as a Pesach? Because they'll probably lie. Had you known you'd be embarrassment to your parents, would you have made the netter? Oh, I wouldn't want to embarrass my parents, even though he would embarrass his parents. But here where he made the netter specifically against his parents, so you see that he's a chutzpan. He's not a liar, just the opposite. He won't lie about it because he doesn't care. He doesn't care about his parents. If he said, I'm making a netter that my parents can't have enough of me, all my stuff is there also to my parents, right? And now you say, hey, you realize that you're embarrassing your parents, would you have done it? He'd be telling the truth now if he says I wouldn't have made it, because he doesn't care about embarrassing his parents because he made an error against them. So modem chacham Rav Lezer v'davar shebeinu lebeinu v'imo sheposlim chadarav. There you could use that as a pesach. So here we have machlokas between Rav Lezer and the chachamim, not about the pesach of embarrassing God or being dishonorable to God, because there we assume everybody would just say that. In other words, nobody would have the chutzpah to say to lie and say, no, I don't. I would have made the netter anyway. I don't care about God. Nobody would do that. So when they would say, "Hey, do you realize that you're embarrassing God? Would you have made the netter?" And they say, "No, I wouldn't." We don't think he's telling the truth, and therefore that's not a good Pesach because he's not telling the truth. The whole idea is, did you regret it? Did you really regret it? But if regretting it involves embarrassing God, and nobody would admit that they would embarrass God. That's the point. So therefore, he's probably lying. The question is, what about Ava V'Imo? Rav Lezer says he would lie about his parents too. We're not worried about that maybe he'll lie about his parents. As we'll see, his parents is only one mitzvah. The Gemara tomorrow is going to talk about being over a one mitzvah. But embarrassing God is like, that's the biggest thing you can do. So nobody would admit that they would embarrass God, right? Nobody would admit to it. So therefore, when he says, oh, I wouldn't have made the netter, I'm not embarrassing God, he's not telling the truth. He might be lying because he wouldn't admit to that. But maybe to the parents he would. So Rav Lezer says, yes, for the parents he would admit it. Therefore, for the parents, it's a good Pesach. According to Rav Lezer, Chum say, no, he wouldn't lie about that either, unless he made the netter specifically about the parents. And you see, he doesn't care about his parents. He doesn't care about his parents. He would be truthful when you say, had you known that you'd be embarrassing your parents, would you have made the netter? If he says, I wouldn't have made the netter, he's truthful because he doesn't care that much about his parents anyway. Or because it's only one mitzvah. Another thing that he said, we had this at the beginning of the Masechet, Poskim v'nolad. Can you make a Pesach? Can you make an opening for a netter? In other words, when the rabbi is being matra netter, can he use an opening of a new event, a new circumstance, something changed, a new development that wasn't there before? Because you couldn't have anticipated that. You see, something because what's a normal Pesach? You regret it. I didn't realize that it's going to cause me this. I should have realized that if I forbade myself from eating all fruits and vegetables, that I would get scurvy or that something's going to happen. Something would happen that I could have anticipated. But something you couldn't have anticipated, a new event, you couldn't have anticipated that. Therefore, we have machlokas here. According to Chum, you can't. Ain't poskim and according to Blaz, you could. Blaz says we don't care if it's no let or not. What's it based on? We'll see based on the psukim. Odom Blaz or poskim and even a new event. You also say, had you known that this and this circumstances change? We'll see an example in a minute. Gemara's going to give a few examples. Chum say you can't. They can't use that as a pesach, as an opening. In other words, you can't get rid of your netter by using an excuse about something that happened that you could not have anticipated. Because you can't say then, had I realized that, I would have known. You couldn't have realized that. It's a new event. Realizing something is, I should have anticipated and I didn't. I regret because I should have known that if I'm going to get angry, if I'm going to make a neder, this and this will happen. But if it's a new event, you couldn't have anticipated, so it's not a valid opening. What's an example? Kate said, Omar Konim She'enin Henel Ish Ploni. I don't want to have any enough from this guy. Reuben says, I don't want to have any enough from Shimon. V'nas sofer. Now Shimon became a sofer. Sofer doesn't just mean a scribe over here. It means a town chacham that he has to learn with, etc. Like you make a neder, let's say, that guy doesn't want to have enough from the rabbi, but he wants to come to shul and hear the sermon, hear the speech, hear the shiur. Now this guy that he had Shimon when he made the neder, right? The guy was just a regular prosta guy. He was a regular simple guy. Now he became a rabbi, and now you need him, or maybe you need him to teach your children or whatever. Oshay Mesias Beno, or made it. I'm not going to have enough from Shimon. Now Shimon's making a wedding. Everybody wants to go to the wedding and have a nice meal. Mesias Beno, and the girsa is he's marrying his son in the near future. And he said, the man who made the neder, Reuben said, had I known that he was going to become a rabbi, for that he's marrying his son very soon, I wouldn't have made such a neder. So Rabbi Lezer says that's a good neder. You can post from Manola. What's the svar for that? We'll see if based on a pasuk. Whereas the Chum say no, ain't post from Manola. That's a new event. You couldn't have anticipated that. Had you realized when you did it, when you made the neder, that this and this would be the this and this would be the result, would you have made the neder? No, I wouldn't have made the neder, but you could have anticipated it. But if it's something that couldn't be anticipated, you didn't know that he's going to become a rabbi, that he's marrying off his son, that's a new event, then that's not a good Pesach for a neder according to Chachamim. Another example, never going to go into that house. That's a haunted house. I never want to go in there. Makes in there like that. Vanasa basically came out. It's a shul now. They turned the house into a shul. You see, in those days also, they took houses, they turned them into shuls. Now he has to go to shul. He wants to go to minyan. What should he do? Basically, had I known that they're going to turn into a shul, I wouldn't have made an neder. Rav Lezer says in all these cases, matzir. Rav says that's a valid opening, and the neder is annulled. In other words, the rabbi can annul the bezdin, or the rabbi can annul it based on that. We say annul is really a bezdin, but it could be even a bezdin of 3 pshutim or 1 mumcha. The Chacham say no, ain't possible annul. So the Chacham say in the Mishnah that you can't use an opening of the honor of your parents because we're afraid you're going to lie about it. You would have made the neder anyway. But had you know, we say to him, had you known that you'd be embarrassing your parents, would you have made the neder? Oh, I wouldn't have made the neder then, but he would have. That's what we're afraid of. So therefore, it's not a good Pesach. Or ain't possible manola. That's what the Chacham say. A new event, a new development. Take a look at the Ran. First of the Ran, Amrulo, Imkain Einadar, about halfway down in the narrow lines, about 15 lines from the top of the page. If you say, had you known you're going to embarrass God, would you have made such a neder? No. There's no Nadarim. What do we mean? Like Gemara is going to explain what does that mean, Nadarim? Why is there no Nadarim? But before we get to that, my Nadarim, okay, let's get into the Gemara and then we'll see what the you see in the Ran where it says 6 lines from the bottom of the Ran, in the bottom page in the Ran, Yerushalmi, Rabo, covered Rabo Shein Mami. You don't matter neder based on that. The Finin or more Rabcha Kamar Shemayim. So just like we agree, everybody agrees that you can't say, had you known you're embarrassing God, you would have made the neder. That's not a good Pesach because everybody's going to lie about that. The same thing with your Rebbe, because your covenant of your Rebbe is like the covenant of Hashem. So now the Gemara says, my ein nadarim. When Amrullah Chachamim, the Chacham said to Rav Tzadok, who said, or according to Rav Lezer, maybe even say covenant of Makam, if you can be posech with covenant of Vimo, maybe covenant of Makam also. So the Gemara says, my ein nadar. So they said, no, Amrullah ein nadarim, imkain ein nadarim. What do you mean ein nadarim? Amrabai imkain ein nadarim nitrin yafa. Nadarim will not be properly released. What do we mean by that? So take a look at the Ran. Mayin Nadarim, Amrabayim Kain Nadarim Nitin Yafa. Shafilu. We're 4 lines from the bottom of the page in the Ran. Afilu imitchil loya nim they covered all. Even if he wouldn't have stopped from making that because of kavod, he doesn't care about God's honor. Lo yois panav. He wouldn't have the chutzpah to say that. Lo yois panav bekach lifnei chacham before chacham to say what? Yeah, I would have made the neder anyway. I don't care about God's honor. Yishakron. He's going to lie. The Yomer Eloi Siadea, had I known that I'm embarrassing God, I would have made a neder. but he's not telling the truth. He just wouldn't have the chutzpah to admit that. That's not a good atar sadar, because the whole kind of Pesach is, had you known such and such, would you have made the neder? And he said, I wouldn't have made the neder then. Right? And if he's telling the truth, then it's a good Pesach, and the neder is a no. But here he's going to lie about it, because nobody would admit that they wouldn't mind embarrassing God. No, to a rabbi, right? They're not going to admit it to the rabbi. Because then Mod Rav Lezer Rabbanan. Rav Lezer Mod Rabbanan Shein Postim Kavod Hamakom. Rav Lezer started from Mishnah by saying Postim Kavod Avimo, like Kavod Hamakom. Even Rav Lezer Rabbanan Shein Postim Kavod Hamakom. Umiba Kavod Avimo Pol. That's the machlokas between Racham and Rav Lezer in our Mishnah. Can you use the Pesach embarrassing your parents? The Rabbanan Asri. The Rabbanan say you can't use that as a Pesach. It's still they hold lotion of Kavod Hamakom. Makes a difference if it's God's honor of lotion of Kavod Avimo. Ain't on a mayas. A person wouldn't lie about that. Had you known that you're embarrassing your parents, would you make neder? Even if he would have made the neder anyway, because he doesn't care about his parents, he wouldn't admit it in front of the rabbi. Hilkach ain't posting. Rav Lezer Savar, cover the makom who ain't a mayas. Cover the makom, he wouldn't have the chutzpah. I would cover the imo mayas. Hilkach posting, therefore it's a good pesach. That's the machlokas over here. So the first shot is a bias says the reason is why can't you use mkain in the dog if you say that you can use cover the makom? Had you known that you're embarrassing God, you made the neder. And there, that's not a good Pesach no matter what. What's the reason? Bai says if that's the case, because he's going to lie, then it wouldn't be a good atar sadarim. Rabba says a slightly different reason. Rabba says im kain ein adarim nishalim. Nobody's going to give me matzah rabbi. If you know that what's atar sadarim, and I know that I'm embarrassing God, I wouldn't have made the neder, right? What do you even have to go to the rabbi for? Everybody knows that excuse. If it's known that all you have to say is, I know that I'm embarrassing God, I wouldn't have made the neder. Nobody's going to bother going to a chacham. Says the Ran at the top of the page on the right side. Nobody's going to buy every person. He's going to open Pesach himself. What? And as we see over here, it's mashma that the chachamim, when you go to a Talmud chacham, a bezdin to be matzah neder, it's not that he has some special power. I annul it. By the authority, by the authority invested in me by the state of Missouri, I hereby annul your neder. It's not like that. It's like you go to a chacham who can show you that you didn't really make a neder, that you never really meant to make the neder. But if that's the case, that you can use the excuse, had I known I'm embarrassing God, I wouldn't have made the neder. Everybody's going to know that. You don't even have to bother going to a rabbi. Everybody's going to make it, and they won't go to the rabbanim at all, and they won't use that. Sure, Pesach zeh royal chaladar. So that's the second reason. Now the Gemara says, Tanah, the Mishnah said about Rav Lezer b'davar sheben l'bein abba v'imo. Let's say the neder was specifically about his parents. His parents, or you're not allowed to use my yacht, my yachta. Right? You can't use my yacht, or you can't eat my food, or whatever. You're not invited for Pesach. You made a neder like that. There, you could use Pesach. You could say, hey, you're embarrassing parents. Why? So Bishlam Abaya the Amr Im Kain in Nitrim Yafa. Rabaya's reasoning is, what's the reason why we say you can't use God as an excuse? Because everybody, people will lie about God. People will say, yeah, I wouldn't have embarrassed God. I wouldn't have made the neder. I known I'm embarrassing God, even though he would have made the neder anyway. So it's not a good atar sadarim. So if you say that's the reason, so hacha kivin the ichtzafle, since he has such arrogance and chutzpah to his parents, because he made a neder about his parents, right? You can't eat with me. So ha'ichtsafle. So you see, he doesn't care about his parents. So it makes sense that the Mishnah says, if the neder was about something between him and his parents, then you could use that as an excuse. You could say, hey, you're embarrassing your parents. Why? Because he didn't care about his parents. He made the neder about his parents. So if he says, yeah, I know that I'm embarrassing them and that it would be a busha to the family, I wouldn't have. You assume he's telling the truth because he doesn't care that much about his parents anyway. So therefore, if he says, yes, I wouldn't have made the neder, we believe him. So it makes sense. But according to Rav, who says the reason why, when it comes to the covenant of God, we say what? You can't use that as a Pesach. Why? Because if that's a Pesach, nobody's going to go to a rabbi at all. Everybody knows that Pesach. So why over here? Not everybody knows the Pesach about the parents. Why is it different over here? My person, right? Everybody, that's not the same. By God, everybody knows that, but by your parents, not everybody knows that is an excuse. In other words, the reason is this, because since by all other nadarim you have to go to a Talmud Chacham. In other words, once we say that you can't, using God as an excuse is not a good Pesach, right? And we say over here that we said that the Chacham of Lezer, it is a good Pesach. Why is it a good Pesach? And if the reason is because it's a good guy will tell the truth here, he'll tell the truth since it's a chutzpah to his parents anyway. But if the reason is not because of the truthfulness that he's going to tell the truth about his parents because he made that about them, if the reason is because he's not Mishal Chacham, what difference does it make over here? He's not going to be Mishal Chacham anyway. As it says the Ran, take a look at the Ran in the wide lines, not the widest lines, before the lines get very wide. You see the fourth line into the wide lines, not the widest, the middle wide lines. Since he knows that Pesach, in other words, if the reason is, like Abaya said, that what's the reason why by God that we don't use that as an excuse because they're going to lie, right? So over here, he won't lie because he has a chutzpah to his parents anyway. But according to Rava, that says if people know that as an excuse by God, they're not going to go to Talmud Chacham. So over here also, if he knows that as an excuse about his parents, he also won't go to Talmud Chacham. Since he knows that, if the reason is because you're not going to a Chacham, what's the difference? What's the difference between Makam or if he made an error against his parents? If the reason by makom, by where you don't use that as an excuse by God, is because he won't go to Talmud Chacham, he's just going to be matrin himself here also. If he knows that he can be matrin netter by talking about kavod avimo, he's also not going to go to Talmud Chacham. The answer is kivan. Says the Gemara, kivan the kol nidri. Since all other nadarim lo sagilo and b'lav chacham. In other words, the excuse of your parents is only by the parents, but not by all other kinds of nadarim. Even the kol nidri lav sagilo melo chacham. Shari b'shar nadarim, says the Ran, going on in the Ran there before the lines get very wide. Shari b'shar nadarim ain't posum kavod avimo. Only b'kavod avimo is where if the netter was about the parents. There he says if the netter was about the parents, it could be kavod. But over here also, if he's going to use that as an excuse, if you're going to say if the reason is by makom why you don't use makom because he's not going to go to a Talmud Chacham, leave matron himself. He'll also be matron himself if he knows that kavod avimo is a good excuse. So he'll use that also, and he won't go to a Talmud Chacham. The answer is since by all other nadarim, what are we saying according to the Chachamim? That avimo is not a good excuse. Why? Because a person will lie about that too. Had you known you're embarrassing your parents and you made an netter, he'll lie and say, "Yeah, I wouldn't embarrass my parents," right? But if the netter was about the parents, so then we say then it's okay. Then it's a good Pesach. According to Abaya's reason, it makes sense because he doesn't care about his parents. He made a netter about his parents. But according to Rabbi, the reason is because he can't go to the Talmud Chacham. Here he won't go to the Talmud Chacham either. The answer is since by all the nadarim ain't posum kavod, according to the rabbis, not according to Rabbi. According to the rabbis, that ain't posum kavod evima by other kinds of nadarim. We talk sheni odea limtso Pesach, since he won't be able to find a Pesach for other nadarim, only for his parents, but not when the netter is not about his parents. So in other words, Rava's reasoning why going to by using God as an excuse is why? Because if God is an excuse, nobody will ever go to a rabbi. He'll just do it himself, right? He'll never take it seriously. He'll just be matron netter himself. So over here, when it said in the Mishnah, when the netter is about his parents, then the rabbis are motive, you could use that as an excuse. But what's different is that is about his parents, and he knows he could use that as an excuse. His parents, he also won't go to a Talmud Chacham. The answer is, since, yes, his parents is only an excuse if the netter was about his parents. But since by all other nadarim, using your parents, the honor of your parents as an excuse is not a good excuse according to the Chachamim, so he will go to a rabbi there. So go to a rabbi here too. You're not worried about that reason. Again, says the Ram, according to the rabbis, not according to a blesser. According to the rabbis, ain't possible kavod avimo. So we talk sheni that he can't. He doesn't know a Pesach. In other words, using an excuse of God is for sure not an excuse. using an excuse of your honor of your parents is not an excuse either, according to the rabbis, except if the neder was about his parents. Why? Because you're not worried that he's not going to go to a Talmud Chacham. Since by all the Nadarim he has to go to a Talmud Chacham because he can't use his parents as an excuse. So by this neder, when it was about his parents, he's also not going to make the neder, break the neder himself, and he'll go to a Talmud Chacham.
What's an example that you suspended by the parents?
Your parents can't come. My parents can't join us for the Seder. Parents can't.
No.
According, yes, that could be a no. That there he could use the excuse of your parent. And you're embarrassing your parents, that could be a no.
So
Why? Because if the reason of God is an excuse, if the reason is because people won't be matzah netter, right? People will lie about God. They're going to lie about God, right? Even if they would have made the netter anyway, not caring about God, they would lie about it and say, "Oh, I'm not going to." They're embarrassed to tell the rabbi that I would have made the netter anyway. I don't care about God. So since they're lying, that's not a good excuse. But when it comes to the parents, if he made the netter about his parents, then it's a good excuse because he doesn't care about his parents. He wouldn't lie about it. When they ask him, had you known you're embarrassing your parents, that you're dishonoring your parents, would you have made the netter anyway? We believe him if he says, I wouldn't have made the netter anyway. Because you see, he has no respect for his parents because he made a netter about them, according to that reason, according to Bai's reason. According to Rava's reason, the reason why by God we say that that's not a good excuse is because nobody will go to the rabbi. So over here also, by the parents though, it's okay to make it be posted netter. Why? Because he's going to go to the rabbi anyway, since he goes to the rabbi for all of the nadarim. Because again, according to the Chachamim, the honor of your parents is not a good excuse because we're afraid that he's going to lie about that too. According to Rabbi Lezer, a person would lie. A person would not lie about his parents. And therefore, it's a good excuse. It's a good excuse. The person, he wouldn't lie about God. Had you known you're dishonoring God, would you have made the netter? And he says, I wouldn't have made the netter. By God, we don't believe him because nobody's going to admit that they don't mind dishonoring God. But Rabbi Lezer says he wouldn't mind dishonoring his parents in general. Therefore, it's a good Pesach because you believe him when he says, I wouldn't have made the netter had I known I'm dishonoring them. Because it's not such a big deal to dishonor his parents. He wouldn't lie about that because he doesn't mind it. According to Chacham though, the Lezer says covered up he would lie about it. Therefore, it's a good Pesach. You don't think he's lying. According to Rav, the reason is Ein Nishon L'Chacham. We have to stretch it a little bit when it comes to the parents. If he made the netter about the parents, because since Ein Adarm, because the reason by God is because if you say God is a good excuse, he's not going to go to a Talmud Chacham. But for the parents, he would go to Talmud Chacham since he goes to the Talmud Chacham for all kinds of other Nadarim when the Nadarim was not about the parents. Rabbi said another. Rabbi says they could use Nolet, a new circumstance, a new development is also a good excuse, according to Blazer. My time, Rabbi Blazer. What's Rabbi's reason? Rav Chisda. This says the reason is the pasuk says Moshe, as we'll see, Moshe had made a netter that he was going to stay with Yisro. He'd stay with Yisro and Midian and not go back to Egypt because he was afraid of Dasan and Aviram. He was afraid that they were going to harm him. So Hashem said, you can go back to Mitzrayim now. Ki mesu kol nashim, because the people who were going to harm you, you're afraid of Dasan and Aviram, they're dead. But Misa, the Nolarim, that Misa is a new development. He couldn't have known they were going to die. And yet, even though Moshe had made a netter, we see Yisro forswore him not to leave, but he also made a netter, as we'll see in tomorrow's Gemara. I think it's going to bring down by Moshe. He made a netter that he's not going to go back to Mitzrayim. He made such a netter, and then God told him, well, circumstances changed, so your netter is annulled, right? Your netter is annulled because the circumstances changed. But Noah is a new circumstance. He couldn't have anticipated that. And yet you see, you can go back. You can be matzah ki mesikol nashim. Ramisa nolaru. Mikansha posum no. That's Rabbi Lezer. So Rabbi Lezer is doing it not simply based on a svara. It's based on a pasuk. And as a pasuk could be a svara, meaning that what's the whole concept of being matzah netter? That you made the netter under a mistaken. You made a mistake, right? You made a mistake. you regret it, you didn't realize that it's going to be this. You should have realized it, but you didn't realize it. So you made a mistake. So the netter's not that. So here, Hashem told him, listen, you made a mistake. You thought Dasan Viram, but they died. It's a new circumstance. Oh, they didn't die. But Reb Lezer says it's like they died, and that's a new circumstance. Rabbanan, what's the Rabbanan? So what's the Rabbanan? Why did the rabbi say that you're not posech with no? That's not a good opening, a new circumstance. After all, this is a pasuk. Ksavri Hanu Mimesu, did really Dasan Aviram die? We have a famous from whenever it says they quarreled or they were standing, in El Dasan Viram. Dasan Viram, we find them in Mitzrayim. We find them later on with Korach. They were in the Das Korach, Dasan Baviram. So it's this Komak B'Shem Zimbam. That's Dasan Viram. The same guys in Mitzrayim were later on with Korach. Elmer Shlaka, Shiur was saying they became poor. They lost their assets. And if they lost their assets, they're considered poor. So it wasn't really a new circumstance. Huh? Considered dead. It's dead. They're considered dead. Now, what's the reason why? So according to the Rabbanan, that's not Nola. In other words, what God said is you can go back there because they're poor now. They're not. Nobody listens to them. They're no longer a threat. Okay. So the Mefarshim all say over here, okay, fine. They're no longer a threat, but now they became poor. That's also Nola. That's also Nola. So Rashi says over here. Rashi on the left side says that. Allah know the higher comes from Rahmana. Kimesi El Yod Machsem. Mahaynu Kimesu. The Achukam Rahmana. The wide lines in Rashi on the left. Hanuk Far Mesu Ba'osa Shah Kodem Shanadarta. In other words, you're right. According to Rashi, Rashi says you're right that they didn't really die. They became poor, and they became poor already when you made the netter. In other words, the whole thing was a mistake. According to Rashi, it's mashma that poverty is also a nolad. It's also a change in circumstance. You understand? Except what he's saying is when you made the netter, it was a mistake because they were already poor. It's not nolad. Nolad means after you made the netter, a new development happened. But over here, it was already before. The whole thing was a mistake. It was a mistake, and therefore it's not a. Therefore, the regret. Nolad is not charata. Charata means I regret that I did because I didn't realize something. I made a mistake at the time. I didn't realize what I was doing. So because I regret what I was doing and I made a mistake. But if it's nolad, the nolad is not. That's what Rashi learns. However, the Ran learns differently. Most Rishonim don't learn that way, and they say the chamosim. Why? Says the Ran. Take a look at the Ran in the third of the widest lines in the Ran on the right side. It's not on the right anymore, but it's in the big lines. The Pesach Shchiachu the Meshavele Neder Tos Aval Nola Lo. This is really going on the Mishnah. When he said the Cham Asher by Nola, it's because a Pesach, an opening which is common, happens all the time, that makes a neder into a mistake. Should have known what you were doing. You made a mistake. I should have been. What's a mistake? A mistake is I made a mistake. I should have known better, right? I should have understood what the circumstance. I should have known what was going on over here. If something happened later on after I made the neder, that's not a mistake. I couldn't have foreseen that. So he says, "Acham say Shem the Pesach Shchiach Hu the Meshavim." Only a Pesach when Shchiach makes the neder goes, but no led not. Oh, so according to the Ran, so Rashi we said what was he says? Okay, the rabbi said that's not nolad. Why? First of all, they weren't dead anyway, right? It says that they became poor, and they were already poor at the time you made the neder, therefore it wasn't nolad. But the Ran and other Rishonim learned no. That's not what happened over here. Yes, he became poor, according to the rabbis, but poverty is not nolad. It's very common. Very common. Nolad is a new circumstance. His death is a new circumstance. You didn't know the guy's going to die. But it's very poverty. It's very common for poverty to happen. It says to finish up the Marmishim related. Kol Adam. Kolam Shein Lo Banim Chashiv Kameis. Okay, so basically we're really done with the Gemara in terms of Nolad. The Rav Lezer says Nolad is a good excuse. It's a good Pesach. The new post Nolad. You see from the story, a new circumstance happened. a new circumstance happened. Even according to the way Rashi learns, it's a little bit easier to understand Rabbi Lazar, because Lamaisa, Dasan and Aviram were still alive. Okay, but they became poor, but maybe they became poor. Maybe the Rashi will learn that they became poor is also a new circumstance. So even whether it's that they died or they became poor, that's nolad. And you see that nolad is a good excuse, is a good opening for a netter. And God said you can go back to Mitzrayim now because your netter is no longer valid because the circumstances changed. Either they died, or they became poor. The rabbis say no, they became poor. And therefore, you can go back there, they've lost their influence and they're no longer a threat to you, but it's not nolad. Death it would be a nolad, and that wouldn't be a good excuse for a netter. But poverty is an excuse, and poverty could have been foreseen. And therefore, you made the netter based on the fact that they were powerful people and they could have harmed you. You know what? You should have realized that they could become poor, and in 1 second, they no longer are a threat to you, and therefore you can go back. But it's not nolad because it's a common thing. Before we get to the Ran, let's just finish the Gemara. If a person Rahman has no children, as if he's dead. Shneimar, Havali Banim, we just had by Rachel. Rachel said, Havali Banim, if I don't have any children, I'm like dead. Four people are considered like they're dead. These are the four: a person who's poor, a person who's a leper, a blind person, and a person who has no children. How do we know these four things? Because he said, and we just explained that the Dasan of Aviram didn't really die, but they were poor, so they lost their influence. And you see that just because they became poor shows that they have no influence. How do we know that it's poverty, though? It says Kimesu Kol Nashim. We just said, well, let's just see the other reasons. The other things, the other three are Mitzorah. How do we know Mitzorah is considered a dead person? But if I'll not see Kimes, Aaron looked at her and saw she shouldn't be like a dead person. She was a Mitzoras, Miriam was a Mitzoras, and she shouldn't be like a dead person. So you see Mitzorah is like a mess. Suma, a blind person, he put me in darkness, Kamesa Olam, like people who've been dead forever, meaning that a person who's blind in darkness, can't see, is also like a dead person. And a person who has no children is considered dead, as the pasuk just said by Rachel. Give me children. So these are clear psukim for Mitzorah. Suma also dead. In all these cases, the last three, a Mitzorah and a Suma and a person that has no children, right? In all those cases, it says Mesa or Mace, Mason, Mesa Olam, Mace. So you see that they're like a dead person. But how do we know that a person who's poor is like that? Is considered? It says Kimesa Kol Nashim. Now the Ran asks over here. He asks back to there. Welcome back to everyone. Like Mesa. How do you know that they're poor? In other words, why do we say that a person who's poverty stricken is considered a mess? Because when it dies, Dasan Aviram, it says Kimesu Kol Nashim, and they weren't dead yet because they were alive later on. So it must mean that they were poor. How do you know that it means that they were poor? Maybe they were mitzaras, or maybe they were without children, or maybe they were blind. So the Ran back on Zion Amid Beis, for those who don't have art scroll, could look back on Zion Amid Beis. The Ran said over there, right where the lines get wide in the Ran on Zion Amid Beis, the Ran says, "Lo Mesim Mamish." Like I said in our paragraph, the Kol Makom Shneimar needs some stuff. Animal Dasan Aviram, so we know they were alive. The Inu were the first of the wide lines there on Ran in Zion Amid Beis. The Inu have Machlokus Lakarach Ella Neshehenu Amar Mason. Because they became poor, this is like Mason. The Alpha got the Min Hasan the Arba Chashuv Mason. There are four people considered dead. Ani Vasuma Mitzor Mishan Labanim. So Al-Chabadim is over here by Dasan Aviram when he said Kimesu Kol Nashim, it definitely doesn't mean that they were Mitzora or that they were without children or that they were blind. Why? The Ein Omer Shenistimu. You can't say about Dasid. It says I knock out their eyes, so you see that they all had still vision. But like the Meim and Amisham and Tzram, the care of Klal Yisrael, they were in the middle of Bnei Yisrael, so they could be Mitzaras either. But like Meim Shesrap Matar, Shechazul Mumim, Ma'asego. But like Meim Mishum Shlo Yoban, you can't say because they didn't have any children. It says Kimeis Kol Nashim. In other words, people who are without children, blind or Mitzora are also considered dead So when Hashem said to Moshe, you can go back to Mitzrayim now because Dasan and Abiram are dead, and we're saying it doesn't mean dead, right? It means that they were like dead. Maybe they were Mitzoras. It can't be Mitzoras because they were Mitzorah. They weren't blind because they knocked out their eyes. They weren't, maybe they were without children, because being without children is not an excuse. It's not a reason why you can go back. Would they have lost their influence in Mitzrayim just because they lost their children? A Mitzorah or a blind person, you can understand they lost their political influence. But just having children, like Mishum Shalei Abanim, Amar Kimei Sudim Kain, Heichi Amalei Neshe Nezeh Shuv Mitzrayim, because they go back to Mitzrayim, because they didn't have children. Lo Hayu Nishmar Lamalchus, they wouldn't have had influence with the king. La Shino El Paro, Elavadim Neshi Yodim Rechseim, is because they became poor. When they became poor, they they weren't no longer listened to. People who have money, people listen to it. There's a story in a shtetl, some idiot fell into a fortune of money. Oh, and they put him on the council and they listened to the Vad. One day, of course, with his idiocy, he lost all his money. So nobody listened to him anymore. He was kicked off the Vad. Nobody cared about him. He says, I don't understand. I lost my money, but the seichel is still there. Once people are poor, nobody listens to the poor people. The people who are wealthy, what do we say in Yiddish? The person who has the $100, he has a say in things, right? There, he has a say in things. So that's what it is here too. Yeah. And
they were slaves.
Right.
Right. So what did
but they had? Yes, but they were, the Dasan and Abiram had political influence, you understand? So maybe they were, or they lost whatever money they had.
Whatever.
And they did make money. They were slaves, but they didn't have a law of Kol Mashakon every kind of Rabbo. They made money by selling fish, by selling the fish from the river. And as the Jews had some money there. The Jews always had money, the Jews had money. They had money there.
Don't say it too loud.
Huh?
Don't say it too loud.
Don't say it too loud. Right. So anyway, so it says in the Ran, take a look at the Ran on the last line on the page. Rishalmi, but only lavdali. See, so the Ran disagrees with Rashi. Rashi said, as I said before, that Aeneas could be a nolad. Poverty is a new thing. It's nolad, except when Hashem told Moshe, he made a mistake because they were poor already. When you made the netter, you made a mistake. So it was a mistake. You made a mistake based on false assumptions. Therefore, when you regret it, it's a valid thing. Nolad is not an excuse because you couldn't have known that. But over here it wasn't nolad because they were already poor. Yishami says, but only lav noladu, Omer of Zera, Hanias Mitsuya. It's very common to be poor. Vitos, lav noladu, but regret is not nolad. Omer Avila, Hatos is Mitsuya. That is common. And therefore regret is you regret what you did, and you could have foreseen it. Therefore, that's a common excuse. It's a common happening, and that's valid as a petach. But something that's new that didn't you couldn't have foreseen, that's not a pesach according to the Chachamim. Rav Lezer says yes, and the Chachamim say no. All right, we'll pick from here tomorrow.